Allow me to introduce myself. Professor Quilven Trathnik's triple doctorate holder, published author of 16 peer-reviewed papers, and recipient of the Galactic Science Foundation's Medal of Academic Excellence. Twice. I've spent 347 cycles teaching at the Galactic Xenobiology Institute, and let me tell you, I've seen it all. Or so I thought anyway. More on that catastrophic assumption later. The Institute, for those unfamiliar, isn't just any learning facility. Oh no, this is where the elite send their offspring, where the brightest minds from 47 different star systems gather to expand their intellectual horizons. We're talking about the top 0.03% of students across known space, the cream of the crop, the best of the best, the kind of students who actually raid the assigned material before class, if you can believe such a miracle exists. My position here? Advanced molecular chemistry with a specialization in extreme environment applications. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? It should. I worked my posterior appendages off to get this posting. The pay is excellent, the facilities are state-of-the-art, and most importantly, my students are smart enough that I don't have to explain basic atomic theory 17 times per semester. Easy job. Really. Show up, lecture to brilliant minds who actually appreciate the finer points of quantum molecular bonding, assign some readings, grade a few papers. Simple, straightforward, peaceful. I built quite the reputation over my centuries here too. Firm but fair, they called me. Demanding but reasonable. I expected excellence certainly, but I also rewarded genuine effort and intellectual curiosity. My students respected me. Some even feared me a little, which, let's be honest, kept classroom disruptions to a minimum. I maintained order, fostered learning, and produced some of the finest xenochemists in the galaxy. The system worked beautifully. Then the bureaucrats at the Galactic Council decided we needed more diversity, more cultural exchange, more inclusive academic opportunities for newly contacted species. And that's how the human exchange program landed on my desk like a meteor hitting a peaceful moon settlement. Humans, from Earth, a planet I'd barely heard of before the paperwork arrived. Some little backwater rock in an unremarkable spiral arm, recently admitted to the galactic community after finally developing faster-than-light capability. Apparently, we were now obligated to accept their students into our prestigious institution. For diversity, for cultural enrichment, for political reasons I neither understood nor cared about. I'll admit, I didn't bother reading the extensive species briefing files that came with the announcement. Why would I? I'd taught hundreds of species over my career. Oxygen breathers, methane breathers, silicon-based life forms, hive minds, individual consciousnesses, you name it. How different could one more species possibly be? Besides, I had actual important work to do. Papers to grade, research to conduct. The files could wait. That decision, my friends, would turn out to be the single most catastrophic mistake of my entire academic career. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It was a sunny orbital morning, third cycle of the academic quarter, when she walked into my classroom and proceeded to shatter my entire understanding of what constituted a manageable teaching situation. But let me set the stage properly first, because the comedy, the tragedy, the sheer absurdity of what happened deserves proper context. I had no idea my face was about to become a cautionary tale told in faculty lounges across the entire institute. None whatsoever. The human arrived 14 minutes late to my lecture. 14 minutes. I'd already begun my introduction to catalytic resonance in high-pressure environments when the door hissed open and in walked the most underwhelming specimen I'd ever seen admitted to this institution. She was tiny, absurdly so. Maybe 1.6 meters tall, which put her barely chest height to most of my other students. Thin limbs, fragile-looking bone structure, skin that seemed like it would tear if you breathed on it too hard. Her species had apparently evolved on some gentle little garden world where nothing ever threatened them and food probably just fell into their mouths while they lounged about doing whatever primitive humans did for entertainment. Rachel Kim, according to my registration roster, the name meant nothing to me. Naturally, human nomenclature might as well be random sounds strung together. She stumbled in carrying a worn bag that looked 3 sizes too big for her frame. Oh, her hair tangled like she'd just rolled out of her sleeping pod, and I kid you not, she was eating something. Oh, actively chewing as she entered my lecture hall. Crumbs tumbled down the front of her clothing, which itself looked like she'd grabbed whatever was closest to her sleeping area, without regard for professional appearance. The other students noticed immediately, of course. 47 sets of eyes, optical sensors and various sensory organs turned to watch this disheveled creature shuffle down the aisle. Krevix, a Thelonian in the front row, wrinkled his nasal ridge in obvious distaste. The Sistian twins in the back whispered to each other in their harmonic frequency. Even Fela, normally the most tolerant student I'd ever taught, raised one of her ocular stalks in what I recognized as confusion. I stopped mid-sentence, my teaching appendage still pointing at the holographic molecular display floating above my desk. "How delightful," I said, letting the sarcasm drip from every syllable. "Our exchange student has decided to grace us with her presence. Please, don't rush on our account. We've only been waiting for you to begin the actual educational portion of today's session." Rachel looked up at me, still chewing whatever primitive earth food she'd brought with her, and swallowed. "Sorry," she mumbled, not sounding particularly sorry at all. "The transport system on this station makes no sense. Who designs a map with 17-dimensional layers?" Several students snickered. I did not. "Perhaps if you'd arrived earlier and planned accordingly, you wouldn't have faced such insurmountable navigational challenges," I replied. "Now please, find a seat and try not to disrupt my lecture further." She shrugged, actually shrugged at me, and dropped into an empty seat near the middle of the hall. The chair groaned under her weight, which surprised me given how small she was. Maybe she'd packed her bag with rocks. That would certainly explain the intellectual capacity I was already anticipating from this exchange program. Behind me, standing at his usual post near the supply cabinets, was Broxil.
Hola, Buzz.
My teaching assistant, a Quilvenite, built like a mobile fortress, standing 2.5 meters tall with a carapace that could probably withstand a small explosive. He served multiple purposes in my classroom. Lab equipment manager, yes, but also a certain physical presence that discouraged any rowdy behavior from students who might forget themselves. Broxil caught my eye and tilted his massive head toward Rachel, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. Even he found her appearance comical. I turned back to my lecture, determined to salvage what remained of my introduction. As I was saying before our tardy arrival, catalytic resonance in high-pressure environments requires a fundamental understanding of molecular stress patterns. Rachel pulled out a data tablet, propped it against her bag, and proceeded to finish eating whatever crumbly substance she'd brought with her. Crumbs everywhere. On her desk, on her lap, on the floor. My patience was already wearing dangerously thin, and we were only 16 minutes into a 2-hour lecture block. This was going to be a very, very long semester. 20 minutes into my lecture, right as I was explaining the theoretical impossibility of sustaining exothermic catalytic reactions above 900 degrees in environments exceeding 3 standard gravities, the human raised her hand. I should have ignored her. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to simply continue my lecture and pretend I hadn't seen that small crumb-covered appendage waving in the air. But pride, that wonderful character flaw, made me acknowledge her. "Yes, Miss Kim?" "That's not impossible," she said, as casually as if commenting on the weather. "We do that all the time back home." The lecture hall went silent. Even the environmental system seemed to pause. I blinked slowly, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Those reactions. The ones you just said were theoretically impossible?" Rachel gestured at my holographic display with her data tablet.
"Yeah, we run those in our garages."
"Well, some people do. Hobby chemists, mostly. It's pretty standard stuff for high-performance engine modifications." A few students gasped. Krevix actually clutched his chest as if physically wounded by her audacity. I felt my skin membrane flush with irritation. "Miss Kim, I have spent 200 cycles studying extreme environment chemistry. I have published extensively on this exact topic. I can assure you that what I am describing is beyond the capability of any known molecular process without specialized containment fields that cost more than your entire planet's gross domestic product." She shrugged again, that infuriating gesture that somehow conveyed both dismissal and complete lack of concern for social hierarchy.
Okay, but we still do it.
"Hang on. I've got some data here." She tapped at her tablet while I stood there, my teaching appendage frozen mid-gesture, watching this tiny creature from a backwater dirtball challenge centuries of established scientific consensus. The sheer audacity, the unmitigated gall.
Oh!
The complete lack of respect for academic authority. Here, Rachel said, turning her tablet around so the screen faced me. This is from a hobbyist forum on Earth. Guy named Dennis modified his ground transport using a catalytic reaction chamber that operates at 1,200 degrees under 3.4 gravities. He posted the specs and everything. It's not even classified information or anything, just, regular people stuff. I stared at the screen. The data was in primitive Earth notation, certainly, but the underlying mathematics were sound. Too sound. This couldn't be correct. It violated at least 6 principles I'd built my entire career explaining. This is obviously fabricated, I said, but my voice sounded less certain than I'd intended. Some internet hoax, no doubt. Your species has barely achieved interstellar capability. You expect me to believe that untrained amateurs are performing reactions that our most advanced laboratories consider theoretical exercises. I mean, believe what you want, Rachel said, pulling her tablet back. But yeah, it's real. Earth's gravity is about 1.3 times standard, so we kind of have to deal with high-pressure chemistry just to make basic stuff work. And our atmosphere is pretty reactive too, so we got good at managing exothermic processes really early in our development. Murmurs rippled through the classroom. I saw several students leaning toward their neighbors, whispering. Phila had pulled out her own tablet and appeared to be searching for something. Even Broxil had shifted position, his optical sensors focused on the exchange with obvious interest. My pride, already bruised, now felt thoroughly trampled. Miss Kim, I said slowly, pronouncing each word with deliberate precision, you are disrupting my lecture with baseless claims and primitive pseudoscience. This is an advanced academic institution, not a forum for sharing unverified information from your planet's amateur hobbyists. It's verified, though, she countered, still maddeningly calm. I can send you like 40 peer-reviewed papers from Earth universities if you want. We've been doing this stuff for decades. That did it. The last thread of my patience snapped like an overstressed molecular bond. Broxil, I called, not taking my eyes off Rachel. Please escort Miss Kim from my classroom. She clearly needs time to reconsider her approach to academic discourse. Broxil moved forward, his heavy footsteps echoing through the suddenly tense lecture hall. He was an impressive sight when he wanted to be, all bulk and carapace and implied threat. Rachel looked up at him, then back at me, her expression shifting from casual to annoyed. Are you serious right now? You're throwing me out for being correct? I'm removing you for being disruptive and disrespectful, I replied. You may return when you've learned proper classroom etiquette. I paid for this class, Rachel said, and now there was an edge to her voice I hadn't heard before, something hard beneath the casual tone. Like, actual money? I'm not leaving. Then Broxil will help you find the exit, I said. I believe the concept is simple enough even for a human to understand. That, as it turned out, was the wrong thing to say. Broxil lumbered toward Rachel's desk, and I felt a surge of smug satisfaction watching the size difference between them. He towered over her 2.5 meters of armored bulk versus her tiny, fragile frame. This would be simple, clean, a nice object lesson about respecting authority and understanding one's place in the academic hierarchy. She'd probably cry. They'd all cry eventually, these entitled students who thought they could challenge established professors. A little embarrassment, a little public correction, and she'd come back next session properly humbled and ready to actually learn instead of spouting nonsense about garage chemistry. Perfect. Sometimes students needed to be reminded that education involved more than just showing up and questioning their betters. Broxil reached Rachel's desk and extended one massive arm toward her shoulder. Standard escort procedure, really. Gentle but firm contact, guide the disruptive individual toward the exit, maintain dignity for everyone involved. I'd seen him do it a dozen times over the years. Nothing dramatic, nothing violent, just a simple physical reminder of who held authority in this space. His hand was maybe 3 centimeters from making contact when Rachel moved. I want to be very clear about what I witnessed next, because my brain even now struggles to process the speed of what occurred. She didn't just dodge. She didn't simply lean away or duck under his grasp. What Rachel Kim did was functionally impossible according to every reaction time study I'd ever read about carbon-based bipedal species. Her entire body shifted. One moment she was sitting. The next she'd rotated her torso, trapped Broxil's extended arm against her shoulder, stood up while maintaining that grip, and used his own forward momentum to yank him off balance. his massive frame easily 3 times her body mass tilted forward as she pivoted beneath him. Then she kicked upward. Her leg, those thin little limbs I'd dismissed as fragile decorations, snapped up with the force of a hydraulic piston and connected directly with Broxil's facial crest. The sound was horrific. A wet crunch that echoed through the lecture hall, followed immediately by a shriek from Broxil that I'd never heard a Quilvenite make. They don't shriek. They're predator species. They're the ones who make other species shriek. Broxil's crest, the hardened bone and cartilage structure that comprised the front of his face, shattered. Purple blood sprayed across 3 rows of desks. He staggered backward, both hands clutching his ruined face, that terrible shrieking continuing as he crashed into a supply cabinet. The entire sequence took maybe 2 seconds. Rachel landed back on her feet, slightly crouched, her breathing barely elevated, while my teaching assistant, my 2.5-meter-tall enforcer of classroom discipline, collapsed against the wall, making sounds I'd previously only heard from wounded prey animals. I stood frozen, my teaching appendage still extended toward the holographic display, my mouth hanging open, my brain completely unable to reconcile what my eyes had just witnessed. The lecture hall erupted into panic. Students scrambled away from Rachel, chairs scraping, bags dropping, several species making distress calls in their native languages. Krevix actually climbed onto his desk, his nasal ridge flaring in obvious terror. The Sistian twins bolted for the emergency exit. Their harmonic frequency shifted into pure alarm. Fela retracted all 4 of her ocular stalks and curled into a defensive ball. Security alarms started blaring. Red emergency lights bathed the hall in pulsing crimson. Automated warning systems activated, the station's AI voice calmly announcing a violent incident in Lecture Hall 7 and requesting immediate security response. Rachel stood in the center of this absolute mayhem, looking at her own hands with an expression of mild surprise. "Oh no," she said quietly, though in the chaos her voice somehow carried. "Oh, that's bad. That's really bad. I didn't mean to hit him that hard." Broxil continued writhing on the floor, purple blood pooling beneath his shattered crest, his shrieks now reduced to whimpering moans. I finally found my voice. "What did you do? Always what in the 17 hells did you just do?" Rachel looked at me, and for the first time since she'd entered my classroom, she appeared genuinely concerned. He grabbed at me. It was reflex. I didn't think. I just reacted. "Is he okay?" "Oh man, he's really bleeding. Someone should call medical." "Does this station have medical?" "Of course it has medical." Stupid question. She was babbling now, stepping toward Broxil like she intended to help him, which only made him scramble further away despite his injuries, leaving a smear of purple across the floor. Security burst through the main doors, 4 officers in tactical gear with weapons drawn. They took one look at the scene. The destroyed Quilvenite, the blood, the tiny human standing in the middle of it all. And their weapons shifted to point directly at Rachel. "Hands up," the lead officer shouted. "Do not move." Rachel raised her hands slowly, palms out, that earlier calm returning to her expression. Okay, I'm not moving. But seriously, he needs medical attention like right now. I think I broke his nose pretty badly." His nose. She'd called his facial crest his nose, as if she'd just given him a simple bloody nose instead of functionally caving in the front of his skull. I finally managed to move, stumbling toward my desk to activate my personal emergency alert. My hands shook so badly I missed the button twice before successfully triggering it. This was impossible. Completely, utterly, thoroughly impossible. She was tiny. She was fragile. She was from some backwater planet that had barely discovered space travel. She'd just destroyed my teaching assistant in 2 seconds flat without even breathing hard. What in the name of every scientific principle I'd ever studied was a human? 2 hours later I sat in Station Security Office 7, surrounded by 3 officers and a very calm Rachel Kim, giving my statement for the 3rd time while trying to keep my voice from shaking. "And you ordered your teaching assistant to physically remove Miss Kim from the classroom," Officer Threndix repeated, his 6 fingers tapping notes into his datapad. He was a Valorian, tall and thin with gray skin that seemed perpetually disappointed. "Is that correct, Professor?" "Yes, but that's standard procedure for disruptive students," I protested. She was undermining my lecture, contradicting established scientific principles, and refusing to leave when asked. I had every right to have her removed. Noted, Threndix said, his tone suggesting he was noting significantly more than just my words. And during this removal attempt, what happened? She attacked Broxil, savagely, without provocation.
She broke his facial crest.
Which will take months to properly heal.
I demand her immediate expulsion and criminal charges filed.
She's clearly dangerous, unstable, a threat to every student and faculty member on this station. Threndix's expression didn't change. Let's review the security footage, shall we? He turned his datapad around so we could all see the screen. The recording played from 3 different angles simultaneously, captured by the lecture hall's standard monitoring systems. I watched again as Broxil approached Rachel, extended his arm toward her shoulder, and then that terrible swift violence that followed. But this time I noticed something I'd been too shocked to process during the actual incident. Broxil's hand had been forming a grab, his fingers spread to grasp her shoulder with significant force. And Rachel's face in the split second before she moved had registered something that looked like fear. According to Galactic Academy Regulation 7-4-2, Threndix said calmly, any physical contact initiated by faculty or staff toward a student without explicit consent constitutes assault. Your assistant made first contact, Professor. Miss Kim's response, while excessive, falls within her legal right to self-defense. My skin membrane flushed cold. That's ridiculous. He was following my orders. She's the one who broke his face. She defended herself against unwanted physical contact, Threndix corrected. The law is quite clear on this matter. Rachel, sitting across from me looking impossibly small in the standard-size security chair, cleared her throat. Can I explain something? About humans? Please do, Threndix said, sounding genuinely interested. We have this thing called fight or flight response, Rachel began, her voice quiet but steady. When we perceive a threat, our bodies dump a bunch of chemicals into our system that make us either run away or defend ourselves. It's automatic. I saw this huge guy reaching for me after being told to remove me from somewhere I had a right to be, and my brain it kicked in. I didn't think. I just reacted. You call that a reaction? I sputtered. You demolished him. Yeah, and I'm really sorry about that, Rachel said, and she did sound genuinely apologetic. But I actually held back considerably. If I'd hit him with full force, his entire skull structure would have collapsed, not just his crest. I pulled that kick about 60%. The room went silent. Even Threndix stopped tapping his datapad. 60%, I repeated weakly. Maybe 70, Rachel amended. Look, I grew up on Earth. We have a slightly higher gravity than standard, and our predator-to-prey ratio is kind of intense. So humans evolved to be pretty sturdy. Most of us train in some form of self-defense starting when we're kids. Just basic safety stuff. I took martial arts for 8 years. It's like learning to swim or ride a bike for us. Fundamental survival skills. Threndix had pulled up something else on his datapad, his gray face somehow looking even more gray. Professor Quilven, did you read the species classification files for humans before accepting Miss Kim into your class? I didn't have time, I mumbled. I had research and papers to grade, and Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld. Threndix interrupted, reading from his screen. Gravity, 1.3 times standard. Atmospheric oxygen content, 21%, which is considered corrosive to most species. Average surface temperature fluctuates 70 degrees across seasons. Predator saturation level critical. Disease load extreme. Environmental hazard rating maximum. Native species evolved extreme durability, reflexes, and threat response capabilities as survival adaptation. He looked up at me, and I swear there was pity in his eyes. Humans are apex persistence predators, Professor. They're built to survive conditions that would kill most registered species within hours. Miss Kim isn't an outlier. She's average for her species. I felt my entire worldview crumbling like Broxil's facial crest. The briefing files were 47 pages long, Threndix continued. There were multiple warnings highlighted in red about physical contact protocols with human students. Did you read any of them? I couldn't speak. My mouth worked silently, but no sounds emerged. Rachel raised her hand slightly, like she was still in class. So, am I expelled, or can I go back to learning chemistry? Because I actually really want to learn. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful earlier. I genuinely thought sharing Earth data would be interesting for everyone. Threndix sighed, a long-suffering sound that suggested he dealt with faculty stupidity far too often. You're not expelled, Miss Kim. You acted in legal self-defense. Professor Quilven, however, will be filing a formal apology and attending mandatory species sensitivity training before resuming teaching duties. My humiliation was complete. The tiny human from the backwater dirtball had just ended my spotless 347-cycle career record in one afternoon. And it was entirely my own fault for not doing my homework. Dean Velret's office was located on the top floor of the administrative tower, with windows overlooking the entire institute campus. Beautiful view, terrible place to be summoned when you've just destroyed your professional reputation. The dean herself was a Corthalian, which meant she had 4 arms, compound eyes that could focus on multiple things simultaneously, and a legendary reputation for suffering fools exactly 0 times before ending their careers. She gestured to the chair across from her desk with 2 of those arms while the other 2 continued typing on separate datapads. "Sit, Professor Quilven," she said, her voice carrying that special tone of disappointment that made even tenure-track professors contemplate early retirement. I sat. 47 pages, she began, still typing. The human species briefing was 47 pages long with an additional 16 pages of appendices covering safety protocols, physiological specifications, and cultural context. It was delivered to your inbox 6 weeks before the semester began, marked priority, with a request for confirmation of receipt and review. You confirmed receipt but never actually read it, did you? I was busy with research, I said weakly. You were lazy, she corrected, finally looking at me with all those compound eyes. The effect was deeply unsettling. So now I'm going to educate you, Professor, since you apparently failed to educate yourself. Consider this a condensed version of those 47 pages you couldn't be bothered to read. She pulled up a holographic display between us, showing a rotating image of Earth. It looked pleasant enough. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds, almost peaceful. Earth, Dean Velrith said, has a surface gravity of 9.8 meters per second squared, which translates to roughly 1.3 times our standard gravitational norm. Humans grow up, live, and function in an environment that would require most species to wear assistance exoskeletons just to move without their bones snapping. The image zoomed in, showing atmospheric composition data. I felt my skin membrane growing cold as I read the numbers. Their atmosphere is 21% oxygen, Professor. 21%. That's not just high, that's actively corrosive. Most registered species would suffer cellular degradation after prolonged exposure. Humans breathe it like we breathe standard mix. Their entire biology is built to handle what we'd classify as a toxic gas. I didn't know, I whispered. You didn't bother to know, she shot back. Here's more. Earth's temperature ranges from -40 degrees to +50 degrees Celsius depending on location and season. -40, Professor. Frozen solid temperatures, and yet humans live at both extremes, build cities, raise families, go about their daily lives in conditions that would put most species into hibernation or outright kill them. The hologram shifted to show predator statistics. My organs clenched. Earth has the highest predator-to-prey ratio of any registered inhabited world in this sector. Humans evolved alongside creatures that viewed them as food. They developed persistence hunting, which means they would literally chase prey until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They became the apex predator on a planet full of apex predators using nothing but endurance, tool use, and pack tactics. That's impossible, I said, but my voice had no conviction. Their bone density is 3 times standard baseline. Dean Velrith continued relentlessly. Their muscle fiber composition allows for burst strength that exceeds most species twice their size. Their healing factor operates at speeds we'd need medical intervention to achieve. They can survive blood loss, organ damage, and skeletal trauma that would be immediately fatal to you or me, and they can recover from it with nothing but rest and basic nutrition. She pulled up another chart, this one showing reaction times. Human neural response in threat situations averages 0.15 seconds from stimulus to physical action. For context, your species averages 0.4 seconds. They process danger and respond nearly 3 times faster than you can even register what's happening. I stared at the numbers, my earlier smugness replaced entirely by a creeping existential dread. Miss Kim's response to Broxil was by human standards extremely gentle, the dean said. She perceived a threat. Her biology activated defensive protocols that her species evolved over millions of years, and she neutralized that threat using approximately 30% of her actual capability. If she had struck with full force, as she herself admitted, Broxil would be dead. His carapace would have shattered. His internal organs would have ruptured. One kick from a trained human in full defensive mode would have been lethal. She's so small, I said stupidly. Size is irrelevant when you're built like a biological tank, Dean Velrith replied. Humans are essentially armored compared to most registered species. Denser bones, thicker skin, redundant organ systems, pain tolerance that borders on disturbing. They're designed to survive their homeworld, which is actively trying to kill them every single day. She closed the holographic display and leaned back, all four arms crossed. Broxil will recover, though. His facial crest will never quite be the same. But your reputation, Professor? That's going to take considerably longer to heal. The faculty lounge is already calling this the Kim incident. You're now the cautionary tale about why we read our briefing files. Will I be terminated? I asked, dreading the answer. No, she said, and I felt a brief moment of relief before she continued. You'll complete species sensitivity training, issue a formal apology to Miss Kim, and you'll be teaching Introduction to Xenobiology next semester instead of Advanced Molecular Chemistry. First-year students, the ones who still need basic atomic theory explained 17 times. My humiliation deepened further. That was the exact punishment I'd been smug about avoiding for 3 centuries. Consider it a learning experience, Dean Velrith said, her tone dripping with the same sarcasm I'd used on Rachel just hours earlier. Perhaps this time you'll actually do your research before making assumptions. Dismissed, Professor. I stood on shaking legs and walked to the door. Oh, and Quilven, the dean called as I reached the exit. I turned back. Welcome to teaching in a truly diverse galactic community. Try not to get any more of your assistants hospitalized. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of Lecture Hall 7 once again, preparing for Advanced Molecular Chemistry. The blood stains had been cleaned. The broken supply cabinet had been replaced. Broxil's facial crest was healing, though it now had a distinctive crooked angle that would be permanent. And Rachel Kim sat in the front row on time, crumb-free, with her datapad already open and ready. Good morning, class. I began, my voice perhaps a bit less authoritative than it had been before the incident. Today we'll be discussing catalytic reactions in extreme environments, and before anyone asks, yes, I have reviewed the literature from Earth on this topic, and yes, apparently humans do perform these reactions in their personal garages for recreational vehicle modifications. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the hall. Rachel smiled slightly but didn't say anything. Broxil, standing at his usual post, kept a respectful 3 meters away from Rachel at all times. I'd noticed he'd also started saying please and thank you when asking her to pass laboratory equipment. Funny how a broken face will adjust one's manners. Miss Kim, I said, gesturing to her with my teaching appendage, perhaps you could share some practical applications from Earth's automotive industry, since you were correct about, well, everything. The words tasted like academic humiliation, but I'd learned my lesson about pride. Rachel stood, moved to the front, and proceeded to give a 15-minute presentation on high-pressure catalytic chemistry that was more informative than half my published papers. The other students took notes frantically. Several asked follow-up questions with genuine enthusiasm rather than the polite disinterest I'd grown accustomed to. She'd become my unofficial consultant on Deathworld chemistry applications. It turned out that when your species evolved in an environment actively trying to kill you, you got very creative with molecular engineering. The other professors had noticed too. I'd seen at least 6 colleagues frantically reading species briefing files in the faculty lounge, their expressions growing progressively more horrified as they learned what humans actually were. Professor Thendril had apparently discovered she had 3 humans enrolled in her structural engineering course, and had immediately revised her entire curriculum to include Earth-based construction techniques. Nobody wanted to be the next cautionary tale. A campus-wide memo had gone out 3 days after the incident, short, professional, and absolutely dripping with legal department panic. The relevant section read, "Under no circumstances should faculty or staff initiate physical contact with human students without explicit verbal consent and proper safety protocols. Humans possess defensive capabilities significantly exceeding standard species parameters. Physical intervention should be delegated to trained security personnel equipped with species-appropriate restraint tools. In other words, don't touch the humans unless you want to visit medical. I'd printed that memo and hung it above my desk as a daily reminder of my spectacular failure in academic due diligence. As Rachel finished her presentation and returned to her seat, I caught myself actually smiling. Not the condescending smile I'd perfected over 3 centuries, but something genuine. She was brilliant, enthusiastic, and had single-handedly revolutionized my understanding of extreme environment chemistry. Also terrifying. Let's not forget terrifying. "Excellent work, Miss Kim," I said. "Next week, perhaps you could discuss Earth's approach to exothermic reactions in oxygen-rich atmospheres." "Happy to," Rachel said cheerfully. Broxil made a small clicking sound with his mandibles that might have been approval or residual trauma, hard to tell with Quilvenites. I looked out at my class, these brilliant minds from 47 different star systems, now including one from a Class 12 Deathworld, whose inhabitants could apparently break bones as a reflex action. My easy teaching position had become considerably more complicated, but I'd learned something valuable, even if the lesson had come with significant professional humiliation and one hospitalized assistant. The galaxy was bigger, stranger, and far more dangerous than I'd assumed in my comfortable academic bubble. And humans, those tiny, fragile-looking creatures from their backwater dirtball planet, were perhaps the most dangerous thing in it. Never again would I dismiss a student without reading their species file. Never again would I assume small meant weak. And never ever again would I order anyone to physically remove a human from my classroom. Some lessons, it turns out, are best learned the hard way. Even if your face isn't the one that gets broken in the process.